The first signs of defiance since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan are emerging. Demonstrations have been reported in several cities. Witnesses say the Taliban shot dead 3 protesters in Jalalabad who were waving the national flag. For the latest, we can speak now to journalist Franz Mardi, who is standing by in Kabul. Franz, we saw images of protests yesterday in several cities and violence. What is the situation today?
The protests were apparently quelled yesterday, especially in Jalalabad, where you have seen the gunfire. I also talked to people in Khost, where a similar protest has taken place yesterday. There, one source said 2 people were killed after hoisting the national flag. That said, the Taliban yesterday, members have on social media announced that there will be a complete curfew in Khost. This seems to be at least partly implemented now today in the morning. In the same tweets, the Taliban announced also clearing operation in Khost, apparently triggered by this protest. To what extent this has actually happened is hard to say. 2 sources in Khost said they either heard no gunshots or only few. They mentioned that the Taliban did patrols, but I haven't seen any signs of a vast clearing operation in reaction to that protest.
Franz, I want to ask you about the people who are still trying to leave the country, because we've seen reports that the Taliban are still blocking people from reaching evacuation flights, that they are beating people away from the airport, and the U.S. and allies are trying to secure safe passage for these people. So what is the situation at the airport?
The situation at the airport is chaotic. There's also conflicting information. So I was told today in the morning the gates to the airport are closed. This seems to have been a result of both the American side and the Taliban side being afraid that things get even more out of control. However, there have been people reaching the gate today, so it's not a complete blocking of the routes to the airport as far as I can say. But for example, I'm in direct contact with an Afghan-American citizen who was told to come today in the morning, arrived and had no chance to get in as the gates were apparently closed, and then returned. So it is still chaotic. Even people that are told to come can't get in.
What about the political situation, Franz? We've been talking about the fact that the Taliban are saying they are not the Taliban of old. And we did see senior Taliban figures meeting the ex-president Hamid Karzai. How inclusive could their government be?
This remains to be seen. However, I don't think chances are good for an inclusive government. If one reads the Taliban statements that they have published since last year, or especially listens to a speech that a high-ranking Taliban member gave briefly after the signing of the US-Taliban agreement, there he said explicitly to government officials, lower-ranking government officials who repent, who acknowledge that what they did during the past year was a mistake and apologize for this. They are allowed to work in the government under the Taliban. That's apparently their idea of an inclusiveness, so that they would really share power, significantly share power with other factions is hard to see. And frankly speaking, the way that they now took over the country, why should they? They see themselves as victors, so they don't need to share power with everyone. And all this talk about inclusivity is probably, at least in my assessment, will be rather superficial than an actual significant power sharing.
Journalist Franz Mardi speaking to us from Kabul. Thank you. President Joe Biden has said the U.S. military might need to stay in Kabul past the August 31st withdrawal deadline. In an ABC News interview, Biden rejected criticism of the pullout and said every last American would be evacuated. Well, Germany's government is also evacuating people from Afghanistan. After a slow start, evacuations have picked up speed. Around 900 people have now been airlifted from Kabul. German military aircraft are moving back and forth now between Kabul and the Uzbek capital Tashkent to bring people out. And from there, evacuees are being flown to Germany on commercial flights. And our reporter, Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber, is at Frankfurt Airport. He's been following the arrival of evacuees for us. Benjamin, can you tell us what things are like where you are?
Good morning, Sumi. The situation is now calm here at the airport. There are still some family members and friends of the evacuees waiting for them here. When they arrived in the early morning, it took quite a time because behind me you can see the terminal where people and families are coming out. So it's a pretty long process. First we have the border control by police, then they have a COVID-19 test, and then some of them, the Afghan refugees, are handed over to the Federal Ministry of Migration and Refugees. We arrived in the early morning. The plane landed from Uzbekistan before 4 a.m., so pretty early, similar to the plane that arrived here yesterday. More than 900 have been evacuated from Kabul, and they will continue as well. We spoke to a woman who told us that her father, a 61-year-old father, had to wait for more than 20 hours outside of the airport in Kabul to even make it inside. So the situation is still pretty dramatic for them, and we were also able to talk to some of the people, some of the evacuees who were on this flight, and this is what they told us.
The world can't just leave and desert the people of Afghanistan. They're in a very bad situation and the people need help. There is nothing cheaper than life itself in Afghanistan right now. The world is playing a horrible game with us. The Taliban have arrived in Kabul. A few people have taken over. It's a joke. A joke.
Harrowing testimonials that have one thing in common. On one side, the relief that they made it out of Afghanistan, but on the other side, the uncertainty when it comes to those who had to be left behind.
All right, Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber reporting for us at Frankfurt Airport this morning. Thank you very much. The UN Refugee Agency has described the human toll of hostilities in Afghanistan as immense. It says that half of Afghanistan's population, more than 18 million people, are in need of humanitarian assistance. Conflict, the coronavirus pandemic, and drought are behind the disaster, issues that have led to the displacement of millions of Afghans. There have been urgent calls by international organizations and NGOs to act decisively to help those in need. Well, the crisis in Afghanistan is particularly hard on children. Amid the chaos and violence, scores of young Afghans are among the injured and killed. An estimated 75,000 children have had to flee their homes in the past month. And UNICEF says that millions of minors suffer from malnutrition. More than half of them are under the age of 5. Many of those children are at risk of long-term health problems as a result. The number of children in need of humanitarian aid is some 10 million. That's almost a quarter of Afghanistan's population. Let's get some more perspective on this story now. We can speak to Nahid Shahalimi. She's an Afghan-Canadian human rights activist, filmmaker, and artist, and she's based in Munich, here in Germany. Thank you very much for joining us. You spent the first years of your life and your childhood in Afghanistan. Tell us, first of all, what goes through your mind when you see the images that we see coming from Afghanistan.
Thank you, first of all, for having me here. I don't watch, this was actually the first time that I watched in 2 days because we haven't slept in 5 days. We're on the phone with our staff because I have a lot of projects in Afghanistan that are running. There's another one that's supposed to start in about 4 weeks. The focus right now for me is a solution-oriented focus, which means get the people that we have fought for the past 20 years to emancipate them, to empower them, to democratize them. The funding was given by the same international community that basically left them alone there. We have the moral obligation to get these people out. That is my focus at this moment. So we're building with, especially with the tech community. I'm launching actually today. In a few hours, the press release is going to leave, and it's a campaign that is for solidarity of Afghanistan, to have concrete strategies on how we do it in which phases. As far as the Taliban are concerned, everything that we're talking about is based on assumptions. Until we know what kind of this inclusive government that they're talking about, until we know the frameworks in which we are allowed to work, we will never be able to assess or even project anything, or it's all assumptions. So for this moment, this campaign for me is extremely important. And the Stand Up for Unity campaign existed before, and now this part of it is with NFTs. And the NFTs and the tech world that is standing by us through creativity, we get these funds in cryptocurrency. And the decentralization part is extremely important because of the fact that banks are closed and all the assets of these displaced people are either frozen. That's what's going to happen. So that's what I am focusing on at this moment.
Well, you are helping people on the ground. You have many contacts there with the projects, as you said, that you're working on at the moment. What are people on the ground, particularly Afghan women, telling you about what they're experiencing?
Those that we are in touch with are, of course, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty. Everything that we are seeing, this great behavior that Taliban are showing is slowly changing in action. So the fear is completely there. Everybody is afraid. A lot of them are in hiding. We are trying to make sure that we don't reveal the sources and keep them where they are, so that we don't post and all of those things that people do. I just ask people not to bring out posts that may jeopardize the lives of these women, especially these activists, the journalists, the athletes, the artists, all of these people that we are working with. A lot of their lives will be in danger. So please do not reveal things that you're not supposed to reveal just because you want to make a post. The best way is to put pressure on the governments to take as many out as possible, especially those that are in danger of being persecuted. And they will be, because they have started. We have reports that people are looking for people. We have reports that there are certain activists that are being, sought after. So these are real reports.
Nahid, could you ever see yourself returning to Afghanistan?
Yes, I will. I do see myself returning, but with the help of the international community, so that we can do those projects, especially the one that's coming up. I conceptualized it for 6 years. I've been working on this, and it's gotten through. And the idea is to put it in a framework which would be acceptable for the Taliban, and it's an all-female concept. And I'm hoping we have been okayed. And it's supposed to go on. I'm not going to reveal the name of the institution, nor am I going to say where it is. However, I do hope that I be able to go there in the next couple of months, because we were supposed to go in 10 days. Yes, I do. I do, absolutely, because we need to work with them.
We'll have to leave it there. Nahid Shah-Halimi, Afghan-Canadian human rights activist, filmmaker, artist. Thank you very much for joining us here on DW.